There is a shift that happens somewhere along the wealth building journey. Most people never see it coming, not because it's rare, and not because it only happens to people with high salaries or lucky timing, but because when it actually arrives, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a notification on your phone or a letter in the mail. It arrives quietly, buried in returns you almost scrolled past, while you were still thinking about your next paycheck and whether this whole thing is actually working. You've probably felt this before. You save, you invest, you automate your contributions, and try not to think about the balance too much. You do the things the financially literate version of yourself was supposed to do, and then you check, and the number is a little bigger, and you think, okay, good, that's progress. And then you go back to your week. The commute, the lunches you made at home, the same routine that looks basically identical to how things looked before you started taking this seriously. And somewhere in the back of your mind is a question you haven't quite admitted to yourself yet. Shouldn't something feel different by now? That question is almost universal among people who are on the right path. And the frustrating answer, the one no one really sits down to explain, is that nothing feels different because the most important thing that's happening to your finances right now is invisible. Not metaphorically invisible, actually mathematically invisible. Too small to feel in your day-to-day life. Too quiet to register over the noise of everything else competing for your attention. But there is a moment, a specific, calculable, genuinely transformative moment, where that changes entirely. Where the money you've been building quietly in the background stops growing steadily and starts growing in a way that begins to genuinely compete with your own earning power. Where something shifts from you working for money to money doing its share of the work alongside you. That moment has a name. It has a number. And it is far closer than most people who are already investing realize. Today, we're going to map exactly where it is, why it's so easy to miss, what it actually looks and feels like when you cross it, and most importantly, what happens on the other side. Before we get to the turning point itself, we need to spend a moment on why the journey to it feels the way it does. Because if you're in the middle of it right now, contributing regularly, watching the balance grow in increments that feel almost meaningless, that experience is completely normal. And more than normal, it's mathematically predictable. Here is what most people feel in the early stages of investing seriously. They check their portfolio after a few months and see $400, maybe $600. A year in, it's $1,200. They look at that number, then they look at their paycheck, and something doesn't compute. They've been disciplined. They've said no to things. They've pushed money into accounts they can't easily touch, and for all of that, they got $1,200? It feels like pocket change. It feels like it's doing nothing. And that feeling, that quiet, demoralizing sense that the numbers aren't matching the effort, is the exact feeling that causes most people to quietly give up or quietly reduce their contributions. Not dramatically, just a little, just enough to make the sacrifice feel more bearable, and then a little more. And then the whole thing slows down before it ever had a chance to accelerate. Here's what's actually happening in those years. The growth is real. The compounding is working exactly as intended. The math is correct. What's creating the illusion of stagnation isn't that nothing is happening. It's that what is happening is still proportionally small relative to everything else in your financial life. When your contributions are doing most of the work and your portfolio is still young, the returns are genuinely tiny in absolute terms. Even when the percentage returns are healthy, $1,000 at 10% is $100. $100 doesn't change your life. It doesn't feel like momentum. It feels like rounding error. People talk about $10,000 as a milestone. Some people talk about $100,000. And those are real milestones. There's something genuine that changes when you cross them. A sense of solidity, a first real experience of the account doing something. But those milestones are still early in the story. Progress at $10,000 and even $100,000 is still largely linear. It's still mostly tied to your own contributions. A $100,000 portfolio at 10% generates $10,000 a year. That's meaningful, but it's not the shift we're talking about. It doesn't yet represent a second income. It doesn't yet work harder than you do. The compounding is building, but it hasn't yet taken the wheel. The real tipping point comes later, and it's specific. Your paycheck is loud. You know exactly when it's coming. You can see it hit your account, watch the balance jump, track where every dollar goes. It has a routine. It has a rhythm. Every 2 weeks, money arrives because you showed up and did the work required of you. It pays the rent. It covers groceries. It handles the utilities and the insurance and the small recurring expenses you stopped noticing years ago. It is tangible in a way that feels almost physical, because it's directly connected to time you traded, effort you gave, hours of your life you exchanged for a number in an account. Your investment portfolio operates on a completely different frequency. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive on a schedule. It grows in percentages that the human brain isn't naturally wired to feel the weight of, and it shrinks sometimes in ways that feel alarming, even when they're temporary. For a long time, for most of the investing journey for most people, it runs quietly in the background. The numbers move, but they move quietly, and the growth doesn't feel like it belongs to you in the same visceral way that a paycheck does. You didn't earn it this week. You didn't do anything specific to make it happen. It arrived because of decisions made months or years ago, compounding on themselves in the background while you were focused on everything else. That quietness is why most people underestimate what their portfolio is becoming, and it's why most people miss the exact moment when the nature of their wealth fundamentally changes. That moment arrives when your investment portfolio generates more in a single year than your job does. If you earn $60,000 a year, it's the year your portfolio grows by $60,000. If you earn $80,000, it's the year your investments return $80,000. It sounds impossibly large when you're looking at a portfolio generating $2,000 or $5,000 a year. But this is exactly the moment where the nature of compounding reveals itself. Because it doesn't scale linearly, it accelerates. And once the portfolio reaches the size where it begins generating your annual income, it isn't stopping there. Now, markets are volatile. Returns aren't linear, and your portfolio won't generate exactly your salary every single year on schedule. A better way to think about it is in terms of portfolio targets rather than a single year's return. The long-term historical average of the S&P 500 is around 10% before inflation. That's the number most long-term investors use as a reasonable baseline for planning. So if your target is to have your portfolio generate $60,000 in an average year, you're looking for a portfolio of approximately $600,000. At 10%, that's your number. That's the target. The portfolio value that puts you at the threshold. And at that threshold, something quietly but completely shifts. There is a version of you that exists right now, only in the future. This version doesn't commute, doesn't sit in meetings, doesn't wait for performance reviews or worry about the politics of a raise. This version of you has one job: to generate a return on the capital you've built. It works through recessions and weekends and holidays and the weeks when you're sick or burned out or just done. It doesn't require motivation. It doesn't need a manager. It doesn't have bad months. It compounds. The moment your portfolio crosses its income matching threshold, that version of you becomes real. Not dominant. You still work, still earn, still add to the portfolio. But now there's a second income running in parallel, and that parallel income is about to change the entire trajectory of your financial life. Let's make this concrete, because understanding the concept matters, but feeling the numbers is what actually changes how you move through the journey. Imagine you earn $60,000 a year, and you're contributing $6,000 annually to your investments, roughly what you can put into a Roth IRA in 2025. You invest in a broad market index fund, and you assume the historical average of around 10% per year. These are realistic, achievable numbers for someone starting in their late 20s or early 30s. In year one, your portfolio grows by roughly $600. If you check your balance at the end of the year and see that $600, it doesn't feel like much. It's a weekend trip, a car payment, a single month of groceries. Against a $60,000 salary, it barely registers. Year three, your portfolio is now around $20,000. The return is roughly $2,000. That's more meaningful. $2,000 that arrived without you doing anything to earn it in that specific year. But it's still clearly dwarfed by your earned income. It doesn't yet feel like a second income. It feels like a bonus from a part-time job you forgot about. Year 5. Your portfolio is somewhere around $37,000. The return is approaching $4,000. $4,000 in a year that required nothing additional from you. That's a full rent payment in many cities, or 3 car payments, or a round-trip flight to anywhere you'd want to go. It's starting to feel like something, not a transformation, but a real and growing presence. Now fast forward to year 12. You've been contributing consistently, compounding has been accelerating, and your portfolio is approaching $130,000. The return this year, on average, is around $13,000. You did not do any additional work for that $13,000. You did not ask for a raise or take on a side project. The money that was already there made money, and it's still growing. Year 16. Your portfolio is at $200,000. Average annual return, $20,000. A third of your salary generated entirely by the money you've already accumulated growing on its own. This is the stage where the math starts to feel surreal to a lot of people. Not overwhelming yet, not life-changing, but undeniably, unmistakably real. You have a second income now. It's a junior partner income, smaller than your main salary, but it is real and it is growing faster every year. Year 21. Your portfolio is approximately $330,000. The average return is around $33,000. You're now generating more than half your annual salary from your portfolio alone. This is the stage where things start to shift psychologically as much as financially. The gap between what you earn and what your money earns is closing, and it's closing faster than it opened. Year 26. Your portfolio has crossed $600,000. The average annual return is approximately $60,000. Your investments are now generating, in an average year, exactly what your job generates. You have crossed the threshold without an extra hour of work, without a promotion, a side hustle, a lucky inheritance. Your portfolio, built through consistent, automated contributions over 26 years, is now earning your salary in parallel. And there's one more comparison worth sitting with. When your job pays you $60,000, a portion of that is immediately redirected before you see it. Retirement contributions, healthcare premiums, taxes, commuting costs, the actual disposable portion of a $60,000 salary for most people lands somewhere in the $40,000 to $45,000 range after all the friction. Your portfolio's $60,000 return doesn't have that friction. It stays invested. It compounds. It doesn't cost you a commute or healthcare or professional development expenses. In terms of what it can actually do for your financial life, $60,000 in portfolio returns goes further than $60,000 in earned income. And now consider what happens next. The S&P 500's long-term returns mean your portfolio value roughly doubles every 7 years at that 10% average. Your $600,000 portfolio doesn't stabilize at $60,000 in annual returns. At the 7-year mark, it's approaching $1,200,000 and generating on average $120,000 per year. 7 years after that, $2,400,000 and $240,000 in average annual returns. Imagine your employer called you into their office and said, "We're going to double your salary every 7 years, automatically, without you doing anything extra or negotiating for it." That offer would feel extraordinary. It would feel like the opportunity of a lifetime. That is what compounding at the crossing point actually looks like. Running in the background, silent and accelerating. What actually changes when your portfolio crosses its income matching threshold is not what most people expect. It's not that you immediately retire, or that you stop caring about your salary, or that your lifestyle suddenly transforms. For most people, life looks almost identical from the outside. The same home, the same routine, the same Tuesday morning. What changes is the internal experience of financial decisions. When you're entirely dependent on your earned income, every significant expense carries a weight that's hard to fully separate from time. You spend $800 on a repair, and some part of your brain converts that to hours. A full week of work, gone. An extra shift you'll have to take, or a dinner out you won't. Money and time are tightly coupled, and the coupling creates a low-level tension that most people stop noticing, only because it's always there. When your portfolio is generating income that competes with your salary, that coupling loosens. A $800 expense is still meaningful. It still comes from somewhere, but it no longer feels like lost time in the same direct way. Because some portion of what's replacing it came not from hours you sold, but from money that was already working. The portfolio was running in the background, and it covered something. That shift in how money feels, even when the number is the same, is one of the most underestimated changes that crossing this threshold produces. Decisions feel lighter, not irresponsible, lighter. The gap between what you need and what you have shifts from something you manage carefully to something you can think about more strategically. Your relationship with your work changes too, quietly. When you know that a parallel income is running, when you can feel, even abstractly, that your financial life doesn't depend entirely on your continued employment, something in how you approach your job softens. Not your performance, your posture, the internal bracing, the sense that you cannot afford to take risks begins to ease. That easing doesn't require you to leave your job or change anything externally. It happens internally as a natural consequence of the math becoming real enough to feel. And this threshold, once crossed, doesn't level off. The money that's now generating your income keeps compounding. In 7 years, it generates twice the income. 7 years after that, twice again. The parallel income that initially matched your salary begins, quietly and without any additional effort, to exceed it, then to dwarf it. This tipping point isn't a destination. It's the beginning of the part of the journey where the math works decisively in your favor for the first time, reliably. There is also something worth naming about what this threshold previews. The number at which your portfolio matches your income, let's call it the crossover point, is not financial independence. The 4% rule, which most people use to define full financial independence, describes a portfolio from which you can withdraw indefinitely without running out of money. At a 4% withdrawal rate, full financial independence requires a portfolio of roughly 25 times your annual expenses. The crossover point we've been discussing is half that, a portfolio of 10 times your salary, generating returns that match your income. But the crossover point is the first moment you can genuinely see the destination. It's proof in the clearest possible terms that compounding works, that the math is not theoretical, that you have built something real enough to generate serious money without additional effort. And seeing that proof changes the psychology of the journey in ways that are very hard to overstate. Here's the calculation most worth doing today, wherever you are on this journey. Take your current annual salary or your current annual expenses. Use whichever number represents what you need your financial life to generate. Multiply it by 10. That's your crossover portfolio target. The size of portfolio at which your investments in an average year start generating the income you earn from work. If you earn $55,000, your crossover point is $550,000. If you earn $75,000, it's $750,000. If you earn $100,000, it's $1 million. Those numbers may feel far away. They probably are at this stage. But here's what's worth understanding about how compounding covers distance. It doesn't cover it evenly. The first third of the journey is slow. The second third is noticeably faster. The final third accelerates at a pace that surprises almost everyone experiencing it for the first time. If you're in the middle stages of the journey, $50,000 to $200,000 in your portfolio, watching the numbers move but not yet feeling the momentum, you are in the stretch where compounding has begun but hasn't yet become obvious. Every contribution you make now is going into a machine that is very quietly learning to run faster. The returns that feel like small additions are the same returns that 12 years from now will feel like a second paycheck arriving every year without a single additional hour of your time. The investors who reach the crossover point are almost never the ones who started with more money. They are the ones who continued through the years when nothing seemed to be happening, who treated the contributions as non-negotiable even when the returns felt like pocket change, who understood that the journey has a shape, slow, then building, then suddenly fast, and stayed in it long enough to feel the shape change. The year your money starts working as hard as you do is not as far away as the size of that number makes it feel. Compounding has a way of covering the final distance faster than it covered the first. The quiet engine running in the background of your finances is building speed right now. And there is a specific year, but maybe sooner than you think, when you'll look at what your portfolio returned and then look at what your job paid you and realize the gap between those two numbers is not as large as it used to be. Have you reached this point yet? Or if you're still working toward it, where do you think you are on the timeline? And when do you expect to get there?